Hello, mindful friends. Before I left on maternity leave, and as I was preparing for this big change of having a new child in my life, we did a whole class series on navigating change and transition. And now that it's about 2 months after I had little baby Miles, we're going to do a little follow-up on adapting to the changes that arrive in our lives. So as we're prepping for change, we're thinking about it coming ahead in our lives, we normally have expectations, probably some hopes, some wishes, some stories and ideas about how that change is going to go and how we are going to navigate it and walk through it and adapt to it. And then when it arrives and it blows apart all of our thoughts and expectations and stories and ideas, it can be very overwhelming, and it can also lead us to a lot of disappointment or frustration, along with all the excitement of the good things it is bringing to our lives and the big change that it is offering to us and the opportunities. And this happened to me with little Miles, is that even though, we use this mindfulness practice and we say, okay, no expectations, let's live in the present moment and see how everything goes. We all have expectations, and I tell stories about when I'm going to be able to come back to work, how I'm going to be able to plan out my day, what I can accomplish in my days. And when those things don't quite meet the expectation, it can be quite frustrating, and new curveballs come in, things that are different, or things that we had no idea would be a part of this experience end up arising within it. And so we look at that we may ask ourselves, what were our expectations? What stories were we telling ourselves? And no matter what this change is, maybe it was a move we were making or into a new job, and we told stories about how soon we would be getting out and about and involved in things and members of things, having new friends, exploring our surroundings. Maybe it was retirement, and we told ourselves stories about how soon we would have all these hobbies and fill our time and feel great with it and start planning adventures. And when we arrive there, maybe we're noticing, one, it's not happening in the timeline that we wanted. Two, it's not really producing the effect that we wanted. Maybe we find ourselves in moods that we felt like we shouldn't be feeling, or we feel like things are taking a little bit longer than we wanted, or they're a little more effortful than we thought. Or something totally new arises where we were expecting this big open space and all the great things we could do with it and how happy we would be with it. And then all of a sudden something else, a big obligation, comes into that and challenges us. Or we find ourselves in that open space and totally frozen, unable to even fill it with the things we wanted. There's a lethargy and a disinterest. And all these kind of manifestations are things we weren't expecting. They're in our hopes for the future, a good picture of it that weren't quite what we were picturing would happen. And so how do we handle that when it happens? And I can use myself as an example of there were a lot of curveballs that came in with having Miles, as he was 1 month early. So there were challenges that came with that. We weren't quite ready. I was in the middle of teaching classes. I still had clients. And all of that, had to change and adapt and alter my plan. And then he couldn't feed, and so we're having to feed with a little tube and a syringe while he's trying to latch. And he ended up having reflux too, and really big difficulties feeding, so he still can't breastfeed. You have pictures, I have imaginings of, oh yes, soon, after the first month I'll be able to teach yoga and just have him in class. And then you see there's no predictability to when he's hungry, to when he's fussy. He doesn't take predictable naps or isn't down. And so you had these ideas of how things were going to go when, for me, when I could go back to work, what I could fit into the day. And, I have these plans. I've always been someone very efficient person. I like to get things done in a plan, in a certain order. I like to always have things arranged in ways that seem like they work the best, so I can get the most done and the most efficiently. And all of that, little Miles comes along and puts a huge curveball in it. Is you can't do what you thought you could. You have an agenda, and 2 seconds later he has poop flying up his back and covering his clothes. Or you thought you could get to this one appointment, and all of a sudden he's hungrier and crying and needs a whole feeding session, which takes at least 40 minutes, and then you're late to where you were going. So this, for me is an example of how we have expectations or stories, and then what happens when we arrive there within that change and it's more difficult or different, or we can't do those things. And at first we might want to push towards that agenda, whatever it is, of getting the friends in that time, getting the new job in that time, getting our house arranged in that time. And we want to push towards that agenda, and we get really fixated on fixing things so that we can do that. We can show up in the way we wanted to in this new situation. And that adds more stress, it adds more urgency, it adds pushing and fighting with our situation. And so instead, what we can do is step back and recognize, what were my expectations and my stories? Did I have a timeline for myself? Did I have an agenda for this new stage in my life and what I expected I could put into it? What were those expectations? And then we can ask ourselves, what's the discrepancy between my reality and my expectation? So what's really happening for me? And when we look at that, we say, the negative feelings, the frustration I'm feeling, any kind of fighting, is that because of this discrepancy, that I'm irritated that I'm here, but I really wanted to be here, and the fight to get there is irritating me? And these emotions that I'm feeling, is it because of all the shoulds I put on myself, of I shouldn't still be stuck here, or I had this change in my life and I should just be open and wonderful and appreciating it and loving it. Those big shoulds, and I shouldn't feel the way that I do in this change. Maybe it was a positive change in our lives, and it's like, I shouldn't feel sad right now. I shouldn't feel negative about this. And so we look at that and all these feelings and mental states that come along with noticing this difference between what we expected would happen in the change and what actually did. And then we see, we want to release with compassion some of those shoulds on ourselves, so that we can move away from the focus on, how is this not going the way I wanted? How am I not responding in the way I wanted, or not feeling the way I wanted? Letting that go and just coming back to this side, that is, what is my experience? What is going on here? How does the timing in my day work? What does my schedule look like? What are the things I'm able to do? What emotions am I having that I can take care of without that extra arrow of suffering that says, I shouldn't be feeling this. No comparison to what we thought should have happened or shouldn't. Just focusing on, how am I in this situation? And with great compassion, taking care of ourselves in that. There's no should. Oftentimes, even with Miles, I think I should be so joyful all the time that I have this miraculous gift, which I do, and he's amazing. And sometimes I feel down and sad and even a little depressed in all the changes that are happening in my life. So instead of adding extra judgment that says I shouldn't feel this way, I should be happy all the time, I should always love him, it's a, where am I at? How am I feeling? What can I do to take care of that? What do I have time for? What am I motivated to do? How is my schedule working? And then we become flexible and use our mindful presence to say, how can I be in the way that this is intentionally? Whatever the change came, if it didn't meet our expectations, we look at how it actually is. What can I do that serves me and the people in my life well with how things are going? So drop the comparison and show up in compassion for how things really are. And that's how we adapt to the change in our lives. So I invite you this week to look into where you're at with the changes and where you're at in expectation, and see if you can move away from comparing and finding the discrepancies between how things should be, and just arrive in presence with exactly how things are. Take an assessment. How are they really? And how are you doing in them? And what would serve you best within this present reality? And take care of that with mindful intention. You can find these teachings and many more in my 2 books, Living from the Heart and Healing Mindfully. And I will be starting up yoga again just on Monday evenings. Will has to be home for me to be able to do it. Cannot do it with baby in the room. So Mondays 5:30 to 6:30 for now, with info to come on if I can add another class. And I hope to see you all very soon.